Okay. So the bad news is you're stuck with me again. The good news is we have these wonderful experts whose names and organizations and even Twitter handles I see you can see behind you. So I just want to get right into it so we have time for them to chat and more time for questions. So I just want to recast the question we started with in a little bit of a different way. You know, as has been said, education was not anywhere near the top of the totem pole during the election, and yet after its result, you know, when I see conversations going on and people talking about it, it seems as though people are thinking about it in such a fundamentally different way in terms of what could happen and the types of issues that people are thinking about. So how much, even aside from policy, how much has the election impacted the way people are thinking about education, the issues that are sort of front of mind? How much has that changed? And I will let anybody start.
I'm happy to start if you want to just either go down the row or have people kind of popcorn share.
Sure.
So I actually think for the AFT, there are a couple different reactions, right? I mean, part of it is when you're talking about the election writ large, we actually saw some significant victories locally and in some states. When you look at the messages sent in Georgia and Massachusetts, when you look at some of the school board races across the country, when you look at some of the local levy referenda being funded, I think you see a very different message happening locally of people being awake and investing in their schools and eager to support their schools. When you look at the last winter, the folks in the community coming together to support and expose what was happening in Detroit public schools and some of the conditions in Detroit schools, and then really fight for some solutions that our kids needed there. So there's one where I do think there are some things happening that we need to reinforce, we need to encourage, and we need to support where they're happening. And then nationally, I think there is there was a national narrative building up around community schools, around schools as the heart of a lot of what kids deserved in the delivery of that. And I think we saw that come to a screeching halt, and that's where there's a lot of what next happening.
Sure.
But when you look on the ground, there's a lot of really good work.
Liz, how do you see the role of schools changing in this particular environment after the election?
So I think one of the things that's really hard and important to keep in mind is how much schools have become the location for a lot of the hateful violence and intimidation and harassment that people are experiencing. And, the country is changing, the population of the country is changing, and our schools are more diverse than even our adult population. And I think what is most concerning about this election is rather than celebrating diversity and thinking about what great things there are to come for this country that brings people from all over the world who have all different religious perspectives, diversity of identities, we saw a normalization of some really, really awful ideas, white supremacy especially, but other things as well. And we're seeing children bearing the brunt of that in their school, and that is very, very concerning from our perspective. What has not changed is the priorities of the civil and human rights community. What has not changed is what children need in schools and what they deserve and what the law entitles them to. So from our perspective, we are going to keep fighting with our partners to protect children from discrimination and to move forward on building an inclusive and diverse democracy. We're all going to have to be more vigilant in a way that I think we weren't even before, and that's really, really concerning. And we're going to have to do that work. But one of the bright spots out of what is a really, really hard time for a lot of us in the civil and human rights community is the validation of the coalition model and bringing diverse people together. And that's what we're seeing within our communities is the unity among diverse communities and an acknowledgement that an attack on one is an attack on all, and a determination to stand together and fight against discrimination and intolerance.
Sasha, Carissa, either of you can respond to this, but I would imagine that maybe thanks in part to ESSA, And from the practitioner's perspective, maybe no matter who had been elected, the message might have been just carry on. We have a new policy environment. We know what we need to do. Is that your thinking right now, essentially?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to just piggyback on what Liz said about protecting kids. And I think we saw a lot of our state chiefs and local superintendents come out and make a clear statement about that it wasn't okay for this to be happening in our schools. They stepped up to make sure that kids are protected, and that's a pretty fundamental thing for our state chiefs. You asked early on about about what this election meant. I mean, our states have been, for over a year now, been working on implementing ESSA. They've been doing stakeholder engagement, they've been in their communities, they've been working on what does this law look like and how are we going to implement it. So at the end of the day, election notwithstanding, that does change the game a little bit. The law is still the law, and implementing this is still important, and we're still moving forward on that. We look forward to working with an administration to make sure that we actually have the law is enhanced in a way that states can implement the way they want to. We really appreciated that about the law in the first place, and we hope that that's the case for this administration.
Sasha, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to echo Carissa's point, our members are excited about the possibilities of ESSA and what they can do, and looking to January when they can have conversations with their state legislatures and their state boards to really put this vision of more state and local control into reality. And I know that they understand the critical year ahead of them. 17-18 is the first year they'll have an opportunity to implement this new law, and that's really what they're focused on, regardless of what Washington is focused on right now, because they have an opportunity to really have meaningful conversations with stakeholders about what is school quality in our state, what does that look like, how should we be evaluating teachers, how should we be judging student achievement. So that's really the crux of what our members are talking to me about.
Let's chat about Betsy DeVos for a second. Took me a while to get the pronunciation down, but I think I've got it. Betsy DeVos. So, on the one hand, I was thinking about her background. On the one hand, you could argue that with roughly 2 decades in sort of Republican mega donor circles and her connections in the political world, she's sort of an establishment person. She's familiar to many Republicans who've been around a long time. But when we're talking about education policy, a lot of people are looking at her and saying her goal is to significantly change the system that we have, and that's maybe what she has the potential to do at the department. So sort of maybe a radical change agent. Which side of that is resonating more with you, and where do you see her biggest opportunities to do that? And maybe I would also ask what's sort of at the top of her to-do list at the department, or what should be, I guess.
Well, I'll start. I think there are definitely a few. The approach we're going to take at the AFT is definitely one that we're assuming she will be as activist as she can be, right? So there are a couple things that are questions in that. Part of that is how much attention her boss has to education in general, so how much bandwidth she may have there. But she's been very transparent about the fact that, she, like all of the money she has poured into different elections, different ballot measures, et cetera, that she actually expects something from that. And so we have every assumption that she will take this opportunity and run as far and as fast as she can with it. And with that said, I think from what we have seen, of her support for for-profit charter schools in Michigan, for her support on vouchers, so public dollars for private schools, I think we're going to see we've already seen her priorities, actually, and I think we are assuming that she will move as fast and as far as she can, and we're preparing for that, and we're exposing it as quickly as we can as well, because it is going to be really damaging to our students.
So I know you guys, especially you, Carissa, have state plans on your mind, your members. So how much flexibility are you expecting from a Trump education department when it comes to what can be in those plans, creativity in meeting requirements, What are you hearing? What are you expecting from
Yeah,
that?
well, contrary to popular belief that states would just like all rules to go away, that's really not true. That boundaries and accountability and all those things are important, and there is a federal role in education. I think as we think about the plans, we want to have some space to do what's best in a local context. I think we've seen that having a particular way in which to do something across a nation isn't necessarily the best way to get it done. And if we want to improve schools, if we want to continue to improve education for all kids, we got to have a little bit of flexibility to do it right in, say, a rural context versus an urban context, versus, somewhere else. I think it comes in a lot of different forms, and we're very hopeful that that will continue to be the case, that we're able to expand a little bit in that way.
Liz, I saw you give a thin smile.
Liz smiles a lot in a lot of my comments.
No, on this question of flexibility, I think it's always hard to think of flexibility as a policy value in and of itself, right? We are, of course, concerned that there will be a failure to enforce the law as required under the Constitution. I mean, there is a law that includes requirements, particularly condition for receipt of Title I funds, and we are concerned that those requirements not be enforced. I think it doesn't serve any of us to have an unpredictable environment where you don't know what the rules are and where there's an effort to rewrite. I mean, there's a lot in ESSA that we supported, there's a lot in ESSA that we didn't like, but it is in fact a law that we have. And I think it's, regardless of sort of where you fit in the constellation of people involved in education, you need to know what the rules of the game are, and you need to know what it is going to be expected. Our advocates need to know, the Department of Ed just put out an accountability regulation, which is not everything that we wanted. But they made some trade-offs. It is something I think that we could probably all work with, and it needs to continue to be in place so people know what they're dealing with. So advocates know what they're dealing with when they organize themselves, and educators and administrators know what they're dealing with when they set about their responsibility in implementing the law. So I think that's going to become really important. I will say we're deeply concerned about enforcement around federal civil rights law in addition to things like ESSA. We're incredibly concerned about consumer protections in higher education. That's been a really important point of progress for this administration, is students who are being exploited by for-profit colleges and getting them the remedies that they're owed, and preventing the situation in which they acquire a lot of debt for a meaningless degree, or even if they complete it all. So we are expecting robust enforcement. We're going to continue to push for robust enforcement of ESSA and of IDEA, for Pete's sake, and of all of the nation's civil rights laws.
So on the Office for Civil Rights, the Obama administration has been very proactive in that area, and they're saying that their caseload has gone up in recent years. Part of that may be a function of the public stance that they've taken towards issues like transgender students' rights and sexual assault. I'm wondering if just the Trump administration and Trump himself, his comments about some of these issues might have a chilling effect and might cause fewer complaints to flow into that office. So if there could be sort of a reciprocal effect of maybe budget cutting in that area, but also people just not thinking that the Trump administration will respond very favorably to a lot of those complaints. Any thoughts on that? Or is that going too far? Is that unfair?
I think it's an interesting hypothesis. Part of me also wonders if, just gauged on to what Liz alluded to, the number of hate crimes and incidents of discrimination we're seeing post-election on our K-12 and higher ed campuses, if part of the increase in the Office of Civil Rights caseload is actually a hope people feel that there's a snowball's chance something will be done about the complaint I lodge, right? That they're actually feeling like this is a receptive Office of Civil Rights, because we've been working with the Southern Poverty Law Center for the last few weeks, and we've lodged over 900 complaints collectively that we've seen, and we know from our conversations with leaders on college campuses and in K-12 settings that those aren't even all they're not all actually getting lodged, they're not all getting filed. Oftentimes it's a college professor who says, you know what, I just tore down all of the posters that with swastikas on them on my way to class, and I dumped them in a garbage, and and then I taught, and I didn't have time to report it. We're experiencing some of that, and so I think what we may see is we may see a confidence in lodging complaints. I would hope they would continue to use the Office of Civil Rights that way. I share the expectation that they will then act on those complaints with integrity. And I think you will see organizations such as LCCR or Southern Poverty Law Center or ACLU and others take on those complaints and fight for rights as well.
The other thing I'd add, Andrew, is that, you know, I think the Office for Civil Rights has a lot of important functions, and so remedying complaints is one of them, but providing direction to educators who want their campuses to be non-discriminatory, inclusive places is an incredibly important function. And, you know, this is the other thing we're hearing a lot is school leaders and district leaders who are saying, I don't want this to happen, what can I do? This happened, how do we heal? And I think that's the other thing we really need to see from an Office for Civil Rights is not just when a law has been broken, when a student has been discriminated against, is there appropriate action taken if the school or the district fails to follow through on their responsibility, but for those school and district leaders who reach out proactively and ask for help and guidance, are they getting that? Or are they just meeting a Department of Education that refuses to engage and provide them the support they need to ensure students are protected from discrimination?
If you have a question, you can be the first at the microphone, so have your questions ready. Sasha, can we switch gears a little bit, maybe talk Congress? So we've been focusing a lot on ESSA, but there's a lot, I think, on Congress's plate when it comes to education, including some things that got some traction in this session of Congress that's winding down that maybe are good candidates to get over the finish line. What are you hearing? What do you think is going to be at the top of the list when it comes to education?
I think initially, at the start of next year's Congress, it's going to be more of looking back than looking forward. I know there's a lot of interest in moving the Higher Education Act reauthorization and the Perkins CTE Act reauthorization, but I think that the focus for Republicans, who are again in the majority in both chambers, is going to be looking back at regulations and guidance too, probably, that were issued under the Obama administration, and trying to rescind some of them using kind of a technical procedure called the Congressional Review Act, which I think was started in 1996. I think that's when it was passed originally. It's only been used once, to my knowledge, and it kind of allows them kind of a fast-track way of rescinding regulations before they go into effect. So these are regulations that the Obama administration may have issued, just like Liz mentioned, the accountability ones that just came out earlier this week, and ones that may come out in the next few weeks as well would fall under this as well, in a manner that would ensure that they don't go into effect or they're delayed considerably. So I have a feeling that given that we have a Trump presidency and we have majorities of Republicans in the House and Senate, that they're going to look at some of the regulations, and I don't think this is true just in the education space. I think it's true in the labor space, in the EPA space, and say, what do we want to roll back, and focus on that. The problem, of course, is that they don't have that much time to do it, because under this procedure, they only have, I think, 2 months, 60 days or so, to actually rescind them very quickly. So to use this fast-track procedure is a limited option for them. But I do think that at least initially next year, the focus won't be on new legislation so much as what was regulated on by the administration recently.
Carissa, what are states looking for from Congress? Is it leave us alone, please, or more than that?
What was the question? Did you ask me to tell Congress to leave us alone? No. No, I wouldn't say that. So I want to just echo something that Sasha said. We'd love to see Perkins reauthorized. I mean, it started up this year, and it made it out of the House, but didn't make it any farther than that. We've had a long time had a project on career readiness, and many of our states are working on that right now. We think it's a really important avenue that we need to expand on. I think it helps in implementing ESSA as well, because it provides some other opportunities and other ways to do that. I think Sasha's right about what we're hearing on regulations and moving forward. I will say that, I think feeling like the game changes all the time can be disruptive, but what our states are doing is moving forward, and they've got plans, they've got an overarching vision for what they want for their state and the education for their students, and they're going to continue to move forward on that. Liz is right, there's things that are parameters around that, but they're going to continue to move forward on that, and it isn't necessarily going to matter. So.
As you can see, it's question and answer time, but does anybody other than me have any questions? Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Hi, Sharon Lynch. I'm a professor at George Washington University. You know, one thing we keep on hearing about, this political group wants this and that one wants that, and there's all this contentiousness. What's the role of research in some of the decision-making, you know, both at the state level or at the federal level? Can you talk at all about what you might predict there?
Well, I can give you one example of something that I think will be really critical. When we think about school improvement writ large, you know, we've done accountability systems 15 ways from Sunday, right? But it's this, how do we take care of schools once we've identified them in any way? Going from 4 models to now being a fairly open system, it's going to be really important to know what works and make sure that we have honed in on that. We have the What Works Clearinghouse, but it's also important that we try some things we haven't done before, but we need the research to back that up and the evidence base to make sure that the things that we're doing in schools are really making the impact that we expect that they're going to have. So that would be one example.
One thing I think I would add there is an area where we've seen some real progress around school discipline reform, and what we're hearing a lot is that school leaders and educators, classroom educators, are really looking for advice and alternatives and ways to address things like implicit bias, alternatives to exclusionary discipline, and I think the research there has been incredibly helpful, and we're going to need more, knowing what works, what's sustainable, what implementation with fidelity looks like, and so I think there are a lot of areas like that. There's been some really great progress on supports for students with disabilities, for example, with a new focus in ESSA around the English proficiency for English learners. We're going to need more research about how to best meet the needs of English learners in all sorts of settings. So I think there's a lot of really valuable research that will help us to make sure that all schools are serving all students well.
I want to add one other thing, because I think there's a new responsibility, because high quality research follows a scientific method. And in the absence of someone in the White House who doesn't believe in, who believes in science, I think there is a new responsibility to make sure that we understand what high quality research looks like, and because there are still places where we need that research to best meet the needs of kids. There are places where high quality research exists. We just have to make sure we understand it and we implement it with the fidelity we can. And there are places where we are going to need to we are going to need lots of people to understand how to read high quality research and then how to use it.
I would just quickly say there is the Strengthening Research, Education Research bill that, like many bills in Congress, has stalled.
Yeah.
And I believe it was designed to sort of better weld together research on improvement and helping schools actually use it in practical context. It has gotten tied up, I think, in part maybe because of concerns over a different federal law, the one that deals with student data privacy. And obviously you can see how questions about research and student privacy might mix together and cause concern. So maybe, if not in 2017, in maybe 2018, to Sasha's point, one or both of those might be areas of the law that members of Congress look at.
We have a question from an Ohio listener on the live stream. We're at 500 people on the live stream, so thank you, people on the live stream. They're wondering whether DeVos's previous work indicates that we should be concerned about the quote, fragmentation of education and ultimately overlooking some students, end quote.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah. So some things I would say that what we do know about the nominee is not a lot. We have very, very serious concerns about her attitude towards the safety and value and dignity and respect of LGBTQ students. And that's something we're deeply concerned about. But the fact that there's just not much out there that we know about how she is committed to ensuring that students with disabilities are fully included and receive the accommodations and supports they're entitled to under law, that English learners are valued and receive the supports and accommodations they're entitled to, addressing race, disproportionality, disparate impact across areas, ensuring, for example, equitable access to rigorous courses and things like that. I think there's a lot. What we do know is concerning. What we don't know is concerning. Mm-hmm. And that is where we are right now.
And and the safety of immigrant and refugee students and access to a full and free public education, safe regardless of their documentation status.
Yeah, I would say
yes,
what we know about school choice is that it's not an option that a lot of parents can take advantage of for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes with like a voucher scheme, for example, you can't find a way of getting your child to that private school. Or if your child has a disability, perhaps the private school doesn't want to accept your child, or a history of disciplinary infractions, perhaps they don't want to accept your child for that reason. Or you're not the same faith if it's a religious school. So there's lots of reasons for why in a Betsy DeVos Secretary of Education role, we may see some students overlooked, those students perhaps without the means, those students who are maybe less desirable to the private school sector, if she decides that that is what she wants to promote as a Secretary of Education. If she decides she wants to promote private schools, that is a limitation that's going to be placed on the kinds of policies and in terms of equity that she can really talk about. But I will say that she's going to be limited, frankly, by her own party in some cases, because she won't have this carrot that other secretaries have had necessarily of a large new funding stream that she can dedicate towards promoting school choice. And she'll also be limited by the fact that her own party made very clear that they didn't want the secretary really dictating or incentivizing policy to states when it came to the Every Student Succeeds Act that's now being implemented. So she doesn't have as many tools in her toolkit that other secretaries have had to kind of make good on her school choice promise, or at least the promise that the president-elect has made of a $20 billion funding stream that he wants to trying to push for, and as his lead advocate, presumably, that she will want to push for as well.
Andrew, I just want to say that I think it's premature for me to answer the original question, but just to think about opportunities for kids, it comes in a wide variety of ways. It can come in broadband access, like in places like South Dakota and Utah that get access to kids in rural places. It can come in open enrollment for students. I mean, we've been talking about the lightning rod places, but there are a lot of ways to provide opportunities for kids. And I think we need to keep that on the table as well.
Sure. Last question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ashley Moore. I'm a school counseling grad student here at the NG Shed. My question is, with some of the concerns over school climate and the potential emphasis on career readiness, do you see the role of school counselors potentially changing or having more of an emphasis in some of the schools? I guess, coming down from the district level, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think school counselors are more important than ever before for both the reasons that you stated, the fact that we do have this emphasis on career counseling, and as well as the fact that the new ESSA law does emphasize the importance of kind of school quality as an indicator that encompasses non-academic factors, which can include things like the school climate that exists within a school environment. So school counselors play a critical role in improving school climate, in addressing the mental health needs of students. I mean, if anything, in light of the new law, we need more counselors on the ground, both who can advise students in the more career and college-oriented capacity, as well as who can address the needs that they have to just achieve generally.
I would just co-sign what Sasha said, and not only the role of school counselors, but the presence, to your point.
Right.
And that is that we still have abysmal student to counselor ratios in most of our states.
They're among the first cuts, when there are cuts in many cases.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And if it's not already the library media specialist. So there absolutely, and that is a role, again, that in the local and state space, we can make use of people who are already passionately invested in making sure that we have the schools our children deserve, and this becomes one of our opportunities in fighting for more school counselors.
And sort of, thinking about the data point that came out of the Obama administration about the availability of counselors when compared with the presence of police, I think is really important to think about that, and both making sure that we continue to have access to data like that and that we learn from it.
Yes.
And I think one of the things we're worried about is, what does a law and order rhetoric look like in a classroom full of third graders? And do those third graders get the support that they need, or are they criminalized? And I think that's the other thing to think about in this context. Definitely expanding access to school counselors, and just thinking about the role that school police might play in schools and the way in which that has a negative impact on the experiences of children.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Please put your hands together for our wonderful panel.